Nearly sunk his career. This one, not totally, it didn't, but it certainly damaged it at least through the remainder of the '70s. This is one, sometime in New York City, John Lennon album came out June 12th in America, June 12th of 1972. It had to wait a few months in England. September 15th of that same year, they got it. Not a hit. Only got to number 48 in America. A little bit better in England. It got to number 11. But this is one of those, anytime the subject of what's the worst Beatles solo album comes up, this is always among one of the first mentioned and always ranks pretty high up there in the running for the worst. It's interesting now, though, because people at the time, back in the '70s, that bought it when it was brand new, could only experience in the context of what was going on then, which John had released Imagine the year before, Plastic Ono Band the year before that, and the Beatles, the time of Abbey Road and the White Album and even Sgt. Pepper were not that distant of a memory at that time. So I'm sure that anyone going out, and here you have two classic John albums in Plastic Ono Band and Imagine, and of course the Beatles stuff before that. Anybody hearing that John's got a new album, Beatle fan excited to go out and get it, and they bring this in home and put it on the turntable. I can only imagine the reactions. I didn't buy it when it was new because I was 9 years old. I didn't end up getting this till a few years later when I was, I don't know, seventh or eighth grade or so. But looking at it from the perspective of 50 years later, we can kind of judge it just on its own terms instead of in the context of the time it came out and the history of the Beatles bearing down on it just right before it. Still not a very good album, but I've always had kind of a soft spot for it. It's always been in that class of not very good albums that I like all the same. Another one that came out just a few years before this, Umagumma by Pink Floyd, also not a very good album. And yet, for some reason, I like both of them and I enjoy playing them occasionally. And by occasionally, I mean maybe once every 2 or 3 years, I'll get in the mood for one or the other, and nothing else will do. But even at that, I'm not by any means trying to suggest that this is a great John album or a great solo Beatle album. It's certainly not comparable to any Beatle album in any way, shape, or form. It's a pretty lousy album, let's be straight. But all the same, I do have always had kind of a soft spot for it, like I said. And if you're just getting into John's solo career and don't know much about it except the hits, this would not be the one to start with. Another thing about this album, though, it's a really great time capsule for me of the period of the early '70s. So anytime I play this, it just takes me back to being 9, 10 years old and thinking about the movies and the TV shows and just the things in the news at that time and that period. So it's a very of its time album, and it does have that attribute to it of being a great little reminder, time capsule of the early '70s for better or for worse. It's also, for the same reasons, a very dated album in that you take Imagine and Give Me Some Truth. You've got John, which is a great song. You've got John singing about Nixon and Vietnam, things that are past history now and not all that relevant anymore, but they are historically relevant and they are sort of touchstones of our history that most people remember, even people that were born after the fact. But here you've got John singing about a lot of stuff like the Attica State prison riots, Angela Davis, John Sinclair, Abby Hoffman, names that just really don't mean a whole lot anymore to anyone. And it's kind of thinking, I know on YouTube you see a lot of younger Beatle fans, teenagers and people in their early 20s, and I just sort of wonder if and when they ever get around to picking up this album, when they hear these songs about these people, if they even know who they are, and if they're curious enough to look them up to find out, if they're probably thinking well, I don't really even see why those people were all that relevant back in 1972, and maybe they weren't. But anyway, it's just a very of its time album. So the cover I've always liked. The newspaper, the front page of the New York Times, or whatever the layout design is supposed to be. There's the back. You got the gatefold, which are some different live performances on the other album. And one picture in there you can see somewhere in there is Keith Moon and George Harrison with John and Yoko. Um, oh, the other thing on Umagumma that this reminds me of, because both of these albums are double albums, both have a studio and a live album, and both are really not very good albums. But that's about where the similarities end. So kind of went off on a tangent there, but um, what else? What else? Here are the record sleeves for the inside. This is the studio album with just the song listing and who plays, I think, on the records. There's the back is a ad for the Army. This is the sleeve for the live album, which are several live dates from different places, 1969 and 1970 or so. Uh, some shows he did with Frank Zappa, or a show he did with Frank Zappa, and UNICEF show that he did in London with Keith Moon and George and a bunch of people. So that's that. The let's just get into the music, I guess. Side one, first song, "Woman is the N Word of the World." Controversial title, controversial then, a lot more so now. And but you also have to consider the times that it came out. That was a pretty common word to hear, even just on sitcoms like Sanford and Son and Richard Pryor albums and other things. So a lot more common word back then for there it was. Um, it is I guess fitting in a way to have a song about women being downtrodden and use the comparison, or maybe it's not. I'm not going to get into the political ramifications, but all of that aside, uh, one of the best songs on the album, and actually a really good song, just a really rocking song, great voice. John's a great voice, and it's a song that I've always liked. Controversy aside, one of my favorite John solo songs, and pretty good message. A lot of this album, that's another thing that hampers it, is just sort of naive, misguided, and silly. In that John had just moved to New York from England before this, and he immediately fell in with a lot of these hippie, yippie, radical people. Some of them were pretty out there, and just sort of jumped on all these causes that, in retrospect, uh, he probably second guessed himself. And don't want to speak for John, but I'm thinking that if he could have had it done over, he probably would have just chosen instead not to release an album that year, or to release something else. But uh, Woman is a really good song. I've always liked it. I'm going to give it a 9. I wouldn't suggest that you walk around your office singing it tomorrow, if in fact you're still going to work. But this is also the first album that's a John and Yoko album since their experimental albums, Life with the Lions and Two Virgins, wedding album. So you had the Plastic Ono Band and Imagine that were just John. Thankfully, they wouldn't do this again until Double Fantasy. But you got John and Yoko. So on the studio album, you got a basic 50-50 with John and Yoko. So the next song is Yoko Ono, Sisters Oh Sisters, which, surprisingly, I like quite a bit. It's got an old, early 60s girl group groove to it. Yoko can't sing worth a damn, but she gives it her best shot, and she does okay here. At least she's not screeching and yelling like she usually does. But it's a catchy song. It'd be a lot better if you had a girl that could actually sing on it. But it's still a catchy, good song. And Sisters Oh Sisters gets an 8 from me. So maybe one of the best songs that she's ever done, where she actually tried to sing. Uh, Here we get into the naive, sort of silly, misguided stuff. Attica State, free all the prisoners everywhere is one of the lyrics. I'm not sure that's the best idea. Um, Certainly, to look at conditions of people in prison back in those times might have been, uh, a fair point. But musically, it's just okay. Lyrically, it's pretty damn nutty and naive. Overall, it's just rubbish. Attica State, slightly catchy, but pretty rubbish song. I'm going to give it a 4. Born in a Prison, another Yoko song here. Clunky, just nonsense. Has a point somewhat, a little bit, not much, but it just sounds like bad 70s lounge music. Born in a Prison gets a 2. And again, Yoko sort of tries to sing here, but it's still a sucky song, so it gets a 2. Side 1 concludes with New York City, which is a fairly good rocker by John. It's not one of his best, but it's up there. It's a pretty good one. Got a good piano um, part in it. Nice slice of life. Sort of something that Paul McCartney and Ray Davies excelled in more than John, even though John was pretty good at that sort of thing when he wanted to be. Um, but here you get a nice little slice of life in New York City through John's eyes. It's not terribly interesting though, but it's a nice little rocker, mid-grade rocker. I'm going to give New York City a 7. We turn over to side 2. We get Sunday, Bloody Sunday, which I like. It's a catchy song, musically good. I don't know enough about the whole IRA and Ireland and England situation. I know a little bit about it, but I don't know enough about it to make any comment on uh, John's stance being right, wrong, good, or bad here as far as the Sunday, Bloody Sunday, and the Irish situation. But so I'm not going to get into the politics of any of that by any means. But musically good. The song's marred by Yoko singing on the chorus. Again, the woman just can't sing. You like her, love her, hate her, can't stand her, whatever. But any way you think about her, she can't sing, which is fair play. I mean, Mick Jagger can't sing, Bob Dylan can't sing, Linda McCartney can't sing, but at least well, I'm not going to get into all that. But Sunday, Bloody Sunday, though, overall, I like the song. I think it's catchy. I'm going to give it a 7.5. So we move on to Luck of the Irish. We get another song about Ireland and England and all that stuff. Uh, Walk Over Rainbows, nice little, lyrically nice, kind of a folky song. And I like Luck of the Irish. John's in good voice again. As far as agree or disagree with his sentiment, I'll leave that up to you. But Luck of the Irish, I'm going to give a 7. John Sinclair, this is a song where John's singing gotta 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 about 100 times. Musically nice, lyrically annoying as hell. Overall, it's just sort of there. I'm going to give it a 5. Angela, it's about Angela Davis. Got daffy lyrics, crap singing, just so-so music. Angela Davis gets a 2 from me. The album concludes, I think, if I turn the page and see. Yeah, the studio album concludes with We're All Water. It's This is a Yoko at her screeching, caterwauling, epileptic fit, banshee wailing best, midway through, lyrical clunker of a song, some good imagery, a good message, but not a very good song. I'm going to give it weigh out the benefits, weigh out the detriments, and I come up with a 4.5 on We Are All Water, or We're All Water. And so we get to the live album, and I bought this album, like I said, in, I want to say 77, 78, and I think I probably played the live album. I played it a couple of times getting ready for this review. I usually skip it. I'm not sure that I've played the live album since probably 78 or 79. But side three is the UNICEF concert in England back in '69, I believe, with Keith Moon, George Harrison, Nicky Hopkins, Billy Preston, Eric Clapton, Mr. Boring, John and Yoko, and a whole bunch of other people. So you got all these people on stage, and to not much use. You get Cold Turkey, which is an okay version, though I prefer the studio version on the single. It's just all right. I'll give it a 5. Then you got Don't Worry Kyoko, which is the flip side of that single, and it's Yoko just wailing and carrying on for seems like forever, and some weird feedback, and just or no, that's another. Sorry, that's yeah, it's just Yoko carrying on. Don't Worry Kyoko gets a 1, and then side two of the live album is the appearance of John and when he made a guest appearance with Frank Zappa. Well, Baby, Please Don't Go is an old '50s song that John hadn't sang since the Cavern days. He does that here. It's not bad. It's okay. I give it a 4. It's hardly essential, but things go way downhill real quick. You get something called Jam Rag, which is just sort of a long, interminable, goes on forever, really boring jam. Then you get a song called Scumbag, written by Lennon, Yoko, and Frank Zappa, which is just them saying scumbag over and over and over and over forever. That gets a 0. And you get a song called AU, which is ah or oh, or however you say that, which is just guitar feedback with Yoko wailing over it. Lovely stuff, lovely stuff. That gets a 0. And there is the album. Overall, I would give the studio album a 1. I would give the, I'm sorry, I would give the studio album probably like a 5, maybe a 5.5. I would give the live album a 1, if not a 0. And that is that on Sometime in New York City. And if you're getting John Lennon albums, you're not familiar with them, I would save this till towards the end, after you've gotten some of the better ones first. And pretty much all of them are better than this, with the possible exception of the Two Virgins wedding album, that sort of thing.